There's a difference between resting and shutting off that took me years to understand. Shutting off is scrolling until your body gives out. It's watching 3 episodes of something you don't even like that much because choosing something else feels like too much work. It's lying on the couch with your phone 6 inches from your face, absorbing other people's vacations, arguments, kitchens, opinions, bodies, promotions, morning routines, and carefully edited lives. Resting is something else. And if you ended the weekend still tired, maybe you've been mixing up the two. Maybe Friday night arrives and you tell yourself, finally, I can switch off. You order something easy, you put on a show, you open an app while the show is playing. You check another app because the first one has become boring. Then you return to the first one because now the second one is boring. You're technically doing nothing. No emails, no meetings, no errands. No one is asking anything from you. And yet, your mind never really lands. It just changes channels. Then Sunday evening arrives with that strangely specific kind of exhaustion, the kind that makes you think, how am I already tired? I barely did anything. But that may be exactly the problem. You barely did anything that required effort, and you also barely did anything that gave something back. There is a form of doing nothing that restores you, and there is a form of doing nothing that simply helps you disappear for a while. From the outside, they can look almost identical. In both cases, you might be on the couch. In both cases, you might be watching something. In both cases, you might not be productive. But inside, they feel completely different. Rest makes you more present. Shutting off makes you less present. Rest brings you back to yourself. Shutting off gives you a temporary break from having to be yourself. And to be clear, this isn't a speech against phones, television, or spending an irresponsible amount of time watching strangers reorganize their refrigerators. Sometimes that is exactly what you want to do. There is nothing morally superior about reading a book instead of watching bad television. This isn't about making your free time impressive. It's about noticing what your free time is actually doing to you. Because shutting off often feels good at the beginning. That's why we do it. You've spent the whole day making decisions, responding, managing your expression, remembering things, being reasonable, being useful, being available. And then, finally, you find something that asks nothing from you. The screen keeps moving without your help. The next video appears by itself. The next episode starts automatically. You don't have to choose what you feel like doing because something has already chosen for you. For a few minutes, that feels like relief. You are no longer responsible for creating the moment. You can just fall into it. But there's a difference between relief and recovery. Relief says, at least I don't have to deal with myself right now. Recovery says, I feel a little more like myself again. And many of us have become extremely good at finding relief. We know exactly how to fill every empty space. Waiting for the elevator? Phone. Eating alone? Video. Going for a walk? Podcast. Taking a shower? Music. Trying to sleep? One last scroll. We've built a life where almost nothing is allowed to happen without something else happening on top of it. Even rest needs background noise. Even silence needs company. Even boredom has to be interrupted before it has the chance to say anything. And that makes sense, because when you've been moving all day, stopping can feel uncomfortable. The moment everything becomes quiet, you notice how tired you are. You notice that your shoulders have been tense for hours. You notice that you haven't really taken a full breath since breakfast. You notice the conversation you keep replaying. You notice that you're irritated or lonely or simply worn out in a way that no entertaining video can completely reach. So you keep the noise going. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because shutting off is easier than arriving. Arriving in your own evening, arriving in your body, arriving in a moment that has no task, no audience, and no clear purpose. Real rest can feel strangely exposed. There's nothing to perform, nothing to complete, nothing to point to afterward and say, "See, I used my time well." And that may be why so many of us turn rest into another form of achievement. We download an app to improve our sleep. We buy a notebook to optimize our mornings. We track our habits. We create the perfect evening routine. We make lists of relaxing activities. Suddenly, resting becomes another job we can fail at. Now you're not just tired. You're tired and disappointed that you didn't meditate correctly. You're tired and guilty that your walk wasn't long enough. You're tired and somehow behind on relaxing. But real rest is rarely that impressive. It may not look like anything worth posting. It might be sitting by a window for 10 minutes without trying to use the 10 minutes well. It might be taking a walk without turning it into exercise, education, or content. It might be making something simple to eat and actually tasting it. It might be reading 5 pages and stopping because 5 pages were enough. It might be calling someone without having a problem to solve. It might be lying down before you become so exhausted that you have no other choice. That last one matters because many people don't rest. They collapse. They keep going until the body removes the option. They don't choose to stop. They become unable to continue. And then they call the collapse rest. But being forced to stop is not the same as feeling safe enough to stop. That's one of the clearest differences. Shutting off usually happens after you have crossed your limit. Rest often begins before you reach it. Shutting off says, "I cannot do one more thing." Rest says, "I don't need to reach that point." Imagine your phone battery is at 2%. You turn off the screen. For a moment, the phone looks peaceful. Nothing is moving. Nothing is happening. But the battery is still at 2%. You haven't charged it. You've only stopped using it. That is what a lot of weekends feel like. We stop moving, but we don't reconnect to anything. We reduce the output without creating any input. We remove demands, but we don't create nourishment. Then Monday arrives, the screen turns back on, and we're surprised to discover the battery is still almost empty. Because stillness and restoration are not always the same thing. So how do you know which one you're doing? You don't need a complicated system. Just notice how you feel afterward, not whether you enjoyed it, not whether it was productive, not whether someone on the internet would approve of it. Afterward, do you feel more here or less here? Do you feel like the edges of the day have softened? Or do you feel like several hours disappeared and somehow took you with them? Do you feel calmer or merely interrupted? Do you feel that you chose how to spend the time? Or do you feel that the time happened to you? Shutting off is often difficult to stop, even after it stops feeling good. You keep scrolling past the point of interest. You keep watching past the point of enjoyment. You keep consuming because now stopping would mean returning. Rest is different. Rest doesn't trap you inside itself. You can usually leave it without feeling torn away. It gives the moment back to you. And maybe that is the question to carry into your next free evening. What would leave me more here, not less here? Not, what is the healthiest thing I could do? Not, what would a disciplined person do? Not, what activity will fix my entire life? Just, what would leave me more here? Maybe the answer is still watching television, but watching one thing you actually chose instead of surrendering to whatever keeps playing. Maybe it's scrolling for 20 minutes, consciously, and then putting the phone somewhere your hand cannot reach automatically. Maybe it's sitting in the kitchen after dinner without immediately filling the silence. Maybe it's going outside for no reason other than feeling the temperature of the air. Maybe it's taking a shower and allowing the shower to be the only thing happening. None of these things are dramatic. That's the point. Rest does not always announce itself as healing. Sometimes it just feels like not abandoning yourself for the next 10 minutes. And you may discover that this is harder than it sounds. Because when you stop shutting off, you have to notice what you actually need. You might realize that you don't want entertainment. You want quiet. You don't want distraction. You want comfort. You don't want to consume something. You want to make something. You don't want to be alone. You want to talk to someone who doesn't need you to be interesting. You don't need an entire day off. You need 20 minutes in which nobody, including you, is evaluating how well you are using your life. That awareness can be uncomfortable, but it is also useful. Because once you can name what you need, you have a chance of actually giving it to yourself. You don't have to ban the apps. You don't have to redesign your weekends. You don't have to become the kind of person who wakes up early on Sunday to drink herbal tea beside a perfectly organized bookshelf. Try something smaller. The next time you reach for the thing that helps you shut off, pause for 5 seconds. Not to stop yourself, just to ask, am I choosing this because I want it or because I don't want to be here? There is no wrong answer. Sometimes you will choose to disappear for a while. That is human. But at least you will know what you are choosing. And maybe, before shutting off, you could give yourself 10 minutes of actual rest. 10 minutes without improvement, without measurement, without needing to emerge as a better person. Just 10 minutes in which your attention is allowed to belong to your own life. You may still be tired afterward. Rest is not magic. A quiet walk cannot undo a difficult week. An early night cannot solve everything waiting for you on Monday. But rest does not have to solve your life to make it slightly easier to inhabit. Sometimes the shift is small. You return to the same room, the same responsibilities, the same unfinished week. But you return as someone who has not been absent from themselves the entire time. Maybe you are not bad at resting. Maybe you have simply practiced disappearing more than returning. And maybe that's why the weekend ends, the alarm goes off, and it feels like you never really left work. Because your body stopped, but you never fully arrived anywhere else. So the next time you finally have nothing to do, notice what happens. Do you rest, or do you just shut off? And more importantly, what would it look like to come back to yourself before the weekend is already over? If this helped you name something you've been feeling but hadn't quite put into words, you can subscribe to How to Survive Yourself. We talk about the ordinary parts of being alive that quietly make life heavier than it needs to be. And sometimes, naming them is where the weight begins to change.